Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Me Anything. This is just a place, as always, for, anyone that feels like they need advice, inspiration, mentorship. They need a sounding board, someone to still their wobbles. Hopefully, I can provide that for you. And the more people that show up live, the more that we can make that, kind of a communal request as well. Um, we have had lots of signups. A lot of people have said like, I'll watch the recording, and that's totally awesome. Lots of questions. So to start off, my advice is an offering. I'm not an expert. Um, I don't like that term expert. So for everything that comes out, keep what resonates, release what doesn't. Also, if listen to other people's questions because there is a lot of overlap, and quite a few of these ideas, as well as like my suggestions and other people's brainstorming, etc., can be applied more generally. Um, Again, as always, the more I know about your situation, the better. Feel free to share more if you're live, or otherwise, I'll keep it anonymous. And then the format is basically I'll address the needs of any attendees if they've already submitted a question. Otherwise, I'll go with a submitted question. Um, Generally stay on mute until I open up for conversation, which gives me time to respond and possibly even understand the question better. Um, I will share all these recordings to YouTube, which are public at this point. And finally, feel free to invite anyone in that may benefit from this. If you are looking for more kind of one-on-one interaction with me, personalized problem solving advice, feel free to reach out. Okay, so today I wanted to, there was this pretty good question. Uh, Here, I really, well, I'll call this one partnership parenting. I really enjoyed hearing you speak at the Unschooling Summit about partnership parenting. This is something I'm keen to explore and reflect more on. It often feels hard to parent in partnership and to ensure my own needs are met. How do you balance? Oh, okay, so I'm mixing this one kind of, I believe. I'm mixing this one with another questions because they kind of overlap. How do you balance the needs of all family members while allowing children autonomy over their activities and choices? For example, how do you manage the child's need to do a particular activity at a particular time versus the needs of other family members? Uh, it, for example, if that child's activity clashes with mealtime or a family outing, means that child doesn't participate in jobs to help family life run smoothly, causes difficulty to other family members in terms of noise, mess, etc., or requires interaction from other family members when they are tired or overwhelmed. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot there, but again, I chose those two because they definitely overlap. We're talking about partnership parenting, as well as really keeping in mind everyone's needs and wants and how that works together. Um, to directly address that first question, I want to say you are part of the partnership. The parent is part of the partnership. And what that means is partnership parenting doesn't just mean we're partner. Oh my goodness, partnering to provide for them. So it's not just for our kids. We're like figuring things out just for our kids. Um, it means that we have a partnership based on equitability. Sometimes we're addressing their needs and wants, and sometimes it's us at all as well, and sometimes it's both of us together. Um, I always like to say when people are moving toward unschooling or a self-directed education lens or lifestyle, that it can be easy for the pendulum to swing the opposite way. And I'll explain that a little bit deeper. In general, society has a lot of tight control on young people. So young people don't have a lot of autonomy, they don't have a lot of agency or freedom to do what they're looking to do. And then sometimes when people get into unschooling and they hear that unschooling means like no coercion, or something like that. They think, okay, yeah, young people have had way too much, have been controlled way too much. And so, what would the opposite of that be? Is that the answer too, or might that be the answer? And especially, I think this comes from parents that have had, well, my generation of parents that have been, yeah, just not necessarily empowered to live our lives, to have agency over our own choices and own wants, things like that. Um, yeah, so I think sometimes what that means is the pendulum swings from like control of children to complete lack of control over children. Um, and maybe that's not the right dichotomy. It's not so much, it's more so from control of children to children can do whatever they want, kind of a thing. Um, and so I want you to be careful if you're ever feeling like, you know, prioritizing your children over you all the time or often. Um, because like I said, partnership parenting is like we're in that partnership, right? And of course, we have to do it with equitability. We have to think about like, how do I meet the needs of my child because they are lacking in some of the things that I have. Like I might have, a developed frontal cortex. I might have experience that they don't have. I have a driver's license and I can use it. I have money that they might not necessarily have, right? So trying to even that out, make it equitable, that relationship, but then also finding a bit of fairness for ourselves as well. Um, so the partnership involves communication of our own needs. Obviously, we're trying to figure out the needs of our children. If they say their needs, that's great. And then sometimes we kind of have to guess at what their needs are to help them, especially if they're younger. For infants, they're not telling us directly what their needs are, you know? And it only gets like a little bit easier with each step. So there's a bit of that, and that's like a little bit of that equitability thing that I'm talking about. Um, it's not like, well, everybody that says that they need something gets something. Um, but we have to think about what our own needs are too, because especially when it's easy for parents to get trapped in, okay, I'm taking care of an infant, okay, I'm taking care of a toddler, okay, I'm taking care of a preschooler, that type age, and they have a lot of needs and they don't have, we have to do a lot of the work to help them a lot of the times. But then as our young people get older, to kind of pull back and be like, okay, how much do I need to be doing? And then, hey, what about myself too? Um, yeah. So that comes along with the question of how old is your child and what can you expect of them? So I just want to ground myself again here. We're talking about partnership parenting and then family members, like children's activity that clash with family members' activities. Okay. Two things I want to recommend. I work for Mosaic. I'm a advisor there as well as a guide. And myself and Kristen Him put out this workbook. It's called the Uncurriculum Workbook. Um, and there's two lessons that I think really apply here. If you sign up for Mosaic, they have 60 days free. You would have complete access to download this workbook. I guess I can include a link to that. But I think these two lessons are really applicable here. The first lesson, let me back up. The workbook we designed, it's like, okay, for unschooling, for self-directed education, there's no curriculum, right? There's no like universal curriculum. And so, but that's often what parents are looking for when they go into this. Um, so Kristen and I said, hey, I feel like parents need kind of guidelines to figure out what it is. So it's more of a workbook for ourselves to figure out our family, our dynamics, um, what even is unschooling, what are our own values. So it's like a workbook to kind of align with your own needs and wants and family and all the specifics of yourself. Um, so we called it a workbook because it sounds really schoolish, because I think a lot of families entering into this are coming from a bit more of a schoolish space. So we have lessons, we have homework, et cetera, and it's all kind of like snarky. Um, but the one of the lessons that actually we have a call, like we do monthly calls on the uncurriculum workbook. And next month we have one on this one, which is working to keep our own cups full. Um, and so I'll quote it a little bit here. Adults are so often caught up in the act of adulting. And honestly, it's no wonder there is resistance to growing up these days. Many adults are visibly stressed and anxious. Why would young people look forward to that stage of life? The reality is that when our needs aren't met, it often means we find ourselves running on autopilot, getting aggravated easily, and feeling the joy drain out of us as we attempt to do all the things. Might there be a way we can share our load with the members of our family and or community? This also means we have less capacity to do the things want to do. Um, Yeah, so we have to find that balance, and sometimes that balance means figuring out figuring out the times that work together for everybody for something, or figuring out um, what isn't working for everybody, but maybe one person wants to do, and then how can we allow that, or how can we channel that energy into something else? Um, Another lesson that's really important here uh, is one that we had recently done a call. Again, all these calls are recorded in Mosaic, kind of in their resources. So this one's called Understanding Your Family's Dynamics. And this one talked about something that's really important, like finding sites of mutual fulfillment. So if you go to a meetup, is it just learning how to ice skate, which is maybe for one of your young people, or maybe learning how to ice skate is your whole family, and that works for everybody. But trying to find things where it's like, okay, so sure, maybe ice skating was on Tuesday, but then we have a park meetup that's on Thursday, and that meets most of people's needs. And then whose needs haven't we met, through the week? Okay, it's this one child, and this one parent. And how can we make that work, over time, right? Um, so finding sites of mutual fulfillment is like again, for us, it has largely been like park meetups, because I like young people, which means I can play with, I like young people. I like to be active, so I will play with young people. But I also like to talk to parents. I like to get theoretical. I like to hear about what's going on. I like to share the things that have been going on with myself, and, struggles that I've been having, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like a balance, for my son, my wife, and myself to kind of get our needs met in sometimes like 3 to 4 hours outdoors. It's not always the case, if it's raining and kind of cold, maybe that's not my, that's not a site of mutual fulfillment, that I'm just there begrudgingly. And then I kind of have to, when I get home, I'm like, I need my own needs met now. Um, so, like I said, kind of finding things that work for all, best case scenario, or finding things that work for all kind of in turn. And again, equitability. It's not like one for one always, and figuring out what that looks like. There's another thing I think, like realizing in today's world what is actually required of us to have and raise children. And I started thinking about this like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and still every time I think about it, I am just shocked at how little we understand what it means to have and raise a child in today's society when we make the decision to do so. And I'm not saying that you're going to be prepared for every decision you make. I just think that people are largely unprepared. Um, so I think, especially with young children, you kind of need to always be on, and again, like I said, it kind of eases up with each stage, like from baby to toddler, 3 to 5, 6 to 12, teens, and you're needed kind of in different ways. So the dynamic is always shifting, which is good to always be evaluating what's going on and be intentional with, that information, that data that you're gathering, and then have that conversation with the family. Like, how do you need me now? I can tell that, this is going on. So I've always done this, but that doesn't work anymore. So how can I be needed? Um, so each of these age groups kind of have their own unique challenges, but generally, and I'm going to say generally, maybe like an asterisk here, they require less time being on. But this, of course, depends on temperament. It depends on neurotype. It depends on ability. Um, but again, general. Um, okay, another thing that I'm thinking is that back in the beginning of this, I said unschooling, self-directed education, you know, means no coercion. I disagree with that. I do not think that unschooling means no coercion. I think radical unschooling often means no coercion. And it's not that I disagree with radical unschooling. I think that does work for some people. I would say in general, that is kind of the fringe of unschooling, and that if we're thinking more about the spectrum and how to help people toward self-directed education, that you want to think about what coercion is, and not prioritize complete no coercion, right? So I think I like to reframe this as unschooling means prioritizing consent. And I'm not saying always consent, because there's just some decisions I think that we can always question, but there are some decisions that kind of have to be made without consent, whether that's an emergency, whether that's kind of a last minute decision, whether that's a parent that's doing strewing and stuff like that. Um, there's a lot of nuance here. So, like, if I go to the library and I get a book that I think my son might be interested in, and I leave it open on the table, um, my son wasn't consenting to that experience, but he can also decide if he wants to jump into that, if he's invited to that or not. Um, so, again, lots of nuance there. And I also think there's a lot of nuance, especially when we talk about different neurotypes, especially like PDA. Um, so pathological demand avoidance, or pretty darn awesome, as I just heard it, which is pretty cool. Um, there's a lot of planning that's kind of going on in the background without the consent of the child to try to find ways to prioritize consent. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Before we get too heady in that topic, I just think that let's not focus on coercion so much or not coercion. It's more prioritizing consent when possible. Now, that being said, one person's freedom should not come at the cost of others' freedoms. A lot of nuance here, but this this phrase, this mentality has helped my family understand a lot, a lot, a lot. Um, an example coming from one of the questions, or yeah, right, one of the questions that I mentioned in the beginning was focusing on mealtime, right? So screen time during mealtime, and this is something that has come up in my family too. My son, we've had my son on screens and it's like, well, it's mealtime, it's dinner time, it's time that we've kind of all agreed that we want to get together and, be present with each other, but you have this thing that's going on. And maybe sometimes that's okay, but also maybe sometime, I don't, again, depending on your family's values and agreements and whatnot, maybe that's never okay. Um, and I'm not one to judge. Um, so we have worked through this with, again, family meetings and family agreements in those meetings. And we prioritize in those meetings unanimous consent. And this reminds me back to an earlier kind of Ask Me Anything session that I did. And this was like issues navigating siblings. Um, yeah, so family meetings, family agreements, and unanimous consent. Unanimous consent means that everybody says, okay, all right. But that doesn't mean like it has to be an enthusiastic yes. Um, and this all requires a level of trust. That means you've been practicing it, you've been doing it, you have been vulnerable with each other, you have failed, you've tried again, and you've tried, especially as a parent, to be and model that flexibility and the openness to try new things and the ability to apologize when we mess up. And I that's something. Here were my mistakes from last week, and I'm trying to be better. So feel free to call me out when I do make those mistakes that affect you especially. So definitely a level of trust. So it's not like I'm saying, hey, you've never done family meetings, do family meetings now, and this is going to work for you. It takes some time. Um, and Also to say, side note, like family meetings do not work for everybody. Sometimes it's individual check-ins. Whatever works for your family that you can kind of get everybody moving in the same direction or understanding what everybody understands, or hey, this is what's coming up next week. Um, so I'm saying all of that to say the other statement that is really helpful is good enough for now and safe enough to try. And when I was saying you're not going to get enthusiastic consent on everything, but you might be able to say, hey, this family meeting, we have this problem here. Let's talk about it. What's everybody's thoughts about it? I want to try to focus on a way to address this. So moving forward, why don't we try this for a week? And maybe not everybody is enthusiastically on board, but just say, hey, it's just for a week and we're going to on a week, check in on it together in a week, and how is that working for everybody? And we can pull it back and say, hey, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. Um, you will get a lot more buy-in from your young people if you've been doing this for a while. Because again, it's like that relationship building builds trust as well. Um, so that was a one example, screen time during mealtime. Um, Again, for our family, this is definitely not your family, but for our family, it was like, hey, it kind of does make sense for my son to be off screen time by this time to give a certain amount of time of like recalibration for him before we get to mealtime. That doesn't always happen. And things have been fluid lately and, kind of changing. And I think as reasonable parents, it's not always like, hey, this is exactly how it's going to be. But then we check in and we're like, hey, this is how it wound up being. And it actually kind of worked good, or it actually kind of didn't work good. Let's try and reevaluate or recalibrate and figure it out. So another example would be like noise. How does one family member's noise affect others? And how much does that individual that is making the noise need to be making noise or have some sort of stimulation or just has a lot of energy right now? And I think these are great questions. I mean, I've definitely seen this in our household, like, and I've been the culprit too, being, for example, over rowdy at bedtime because for some reason it worked for me. And then at other times, I was the one to say like, "Hey, it's bedtime. Let's calm down." And I think it's fair to be on both sides of that. But when I talk about noise, I think, that it's often coming from the younger person and the parents like the one that's like overstimulated with all they have to do and then to have an extra song kind of playing in their head nonstop all day, it can be, a little jarring. So again, conversation, family meeting if that works, and then trying to think about what's good enough for now, safe enough to try that everybody can consent to, and then try it out for a week or what have you, whatever works for your family. Try it out for a day, and then check back in. Another example would be like responsibilities, chores, jobs, whatever you call it. I've heard them called contribution, and that's one of my favorite ways to talk about it, especially because when it frames it in a different way, like instead of saying, "Did you do your chores?" Instead, it's a lot more open and gives a lot more like empowerment agency to say, "What have you contributed today? What can you help with?" And especially when you're saying like, "Hey, we're doing both mom and dad are working to do dinner right now. Um, is there something you can contribute?" And maybe that means cutting vegetables. Maybe that means stirring, the meat or something like that, or the dish, or maybe that means setting the table and pouring the milk, or maybe that just means cleaning up while the parents are getting ready. And sometimes that works for everybody. It's not like everybody has to be working towards the same goal all the time. And this goes back to like kind of sites of mutual fulfillment and having our like filling our own cups. It's not always like I need the kids to be helping out with dinner so we can get dinner done. Maybe it's like, hey, I'm perfectly content cooking dinner if someone helps me clean up and if people aren't in my hair kind of right now, so I just need 35 minutes or something like that. Um, so yeah, contributions, and this has come up especially in the way that this question was first stated, like how do I get my needs met? How to ensure my own needs are met. If you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling like you have so much on your plate, this idea of contributions, like what have you contributed today, helps you see so many things. It's not like it's going to take everything off your plate, but it will help you see you're a young person in a different light. You like just feeling better about how things are handled in the family can sometimes be enough to temporarily meet your needs or help lift you out of like the funk that you feel like you're drowning in your own, like, I don't know, all the things that you have to do. So if your child or your young person is helping set the table and you're like, wow, they haven't really helped set the table before, or they haven't done that in a really long time. And I asked them to do that. They pulled through. God, that feels good. It's not like everything is better now, but it is helpful in this moment. Um, yeah, and it just helps you see them in a different light sometimes instead of like, all the anxiety type thoughts that come up, like, oh, they're lazy, oh, they're unproductive, they're worthless, whatever that ick is that keeps coming up. You're like, you know what? They actually helped today, and that's pretty cool. I wonder how that will look in the future too. Um, yeah. Another example of this, your freedom shouldn't come at the cost of others' freedoms. Mess in a communal space. So, like, the living room is messy because there was, I don't know, an obstacle course with a bunch of pillows on the ground and there's balls everywhere. But it's messy maybe for the adult minds, or maybe we have company coming over. So, how does that look? What does that conversation look like? How can we move forward in a path that it's like, yeah, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can absolutely make a mess in the living room as long as by dinner time that's cleaned up. Or maybe your family's like, living room's always okay to make a mess in, nothing in the dining room, or whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be like an arbitrary rule. It's what works for your family and what provides your young people the most freedom without inhibiting the other parts of everybody else's life. Um, so again, all this is with equity in mind. Rules can't be equally applied universally. Um, and explaining why this is true with examples. And I think this goes back to my teaching days, that it was really helpful to say, this applies only to this child because they need help with this thing. What do you need help with? And in what ways can I individualize that support, that facilitation for you? So a great example is, for a lot of homeschooling, unschooling families, it's stereotypically the father that works, right? So maybe dad needs 30 minutes downtime before he comes home. Maybe that's mom as well. So you need to give space for 30 minutes. You could say hi, quick hug, and then 30 minutes downtime. And not everybody gets 30 minutes of downtime at 7:30 or 5 o'clock. Um, but this is different from for your father who has been working really hard, kind of nonstop for the past 9, 10 hours, um, and now just needs like a little bit of a transition period to get used to work mode to family mode. And those are two very opposite, distinctly polar modes. I know that from experience, especially working at home. So that might even be part of it. Like, look, I know I'm still in the same space all day, but when I'm in my office, that is my work time, and I need transition to get out of work time. And if you come in with a question, you need to it needs to be pretty important right now, and put your hand on my shoulder when you want to talk, and I will address you when I can. Okay? Something along that lines. Um, Another one, mom hasn't had free time all day. It's okay for her to zone out right now. Or screen time. Maybe our family says this is really important about screen time for our young people, but how come our parents can kind of zone out on screen time right before bed? Um, a lot of nuance there, right? And it's like, well, how much free time did the parents have today? They had responsibilities that they had to do, they had work that they had to do, they had housework that they had to do, they had to get everybody fed. Um, and then what about for them? When is their free time? And maybe free time, the scrolling pre-bedtime is not the best use of free time, but who are we to judge? Um, I think it's a different conversation altogether. Um, and then like another one, mom just made the whole meal and served it. Can we help clean up? Um, right. So what's equitable? What's reasonable to ask? Um, yeah, reasonable. I think that's key. I think that's really key here. A lot of it is being reasonable humans together. Um, and I think that solves a lot of our problems, or it takes steps in the right directions. Like, not all problems, especially in family meetings, are going to be solved at the first, at the first idea of, hey, let's try this. Sometimes it takes a bunch of weeks, sometimes problem's never solved, but we keep getting kind of closer or we keep thinking about it. And just that thinking about it and getting around, like circling around the idea is enough to connect us in a way that we know, hey, that's a problem. And we can see it when it's coming up and we're like, oh, here we go again. Um, and sometimes again, it's just that mindset shift uh, that that gives us a little bit more space as adults. So, partnership parenting, I think in general, it's we have to be part of the equation, right? And the equation has to be equitable. Equitable meaning like sometimes we have to go the a bunch of extra steps for our young people depending on their age and ability and et cetera, et cetera. Um, but it's also stepping back and saying, hey, what needs of mine aren't being met, and how can I try and meet them, even if it's like a little 5 minutes here, a little 10 minutes here. Um, I wake up early or I stay up a little bit late to try and do this one thing. Um, there's no tried and true answer here. And everybody's going to go through life having some of their needs not being met at different times. Um, and so being open about that too. Um, like I haven't been able to get out and be active in the past 2 weeks, and it is really frustrating. I just want to be heard right now. I think that is a valid conversation at the dinner table or, wherever you can convene a few of your young people. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for this week. But I thought that was a pretty good one. Partnership parenting, um, especially because I had that talk about it at the Unschooling Summit. And it's kind of always on my mind, but I don't really focus on it so much again because I don't think so much about parenting because which feels almost kind of top down to me. I think about how can I be a reasonable human in this relationship? And I don't always get it right, and that's okay. But we always check in and we always talk about it. All right, so thanks for watching this video. Feel free to submit any more questions that you might have. And hopefully we get a couple people to show up next time because I love to have that conversation with people kind of in community. All right, see y'all.